The air in Ouagadougou felt heavy, even though the skies were clear. People walked the streets, buying bread, greeting neighbors, going to work like any other day. But something didn't feel right. Deep inside the presidential compound, Captain Ibrahim Traore sat quietly in his office, staring at a report that had just been handed to him. He wasn't a man who panicked easily. He had seen difficult days before. He had walked through fire to get to this seat of power. But today, he felt something was shifting. Not outside, but inside the very team he trusted. For weeks, his closest security officers had been giving him small warnings. Nothing confirmed, just feelings. Odd movements. Closed doors when they were supposed to be open. Messages arriving at strange hours. Men who once looked straight into his eyes were now looking away. It was like a wind was blowing from the wrong direction, and Traore could feel it in his bones. He didn't speak much about it. He listened. He watched. Every meeting, every conversation, every silence. His leadership had always been about understanding people, not just controlling them. And now his instincts were louder than ever. Someone, somewhere close, was not being honest. There were rumors going around the city, whispers in tea shops and corners of markets. There might be another plot, someone said. Another coup is coming. Another voice added. Traore had heard them all before. He knew what fear sounded like. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was warning. And it wasn't coming from strangers. It was coming from his own house. His chief of security entered the room. He didn't sit, just stood there with a firm look. "Sir," he said quietly, "we think someone close is feeding information outside." He placed a small file on the table. Inside were pictures, phone logs, and times of meetings that didn't add up. Traore didn't speak. He just nodded slowly. He picked up the file and flipped through the pages. The name was not a surprise. It had crossed his mind before, but he had pushed it aside. He had trusted this person, not just as a soldier, but as a brother, someone who had been with him during the early days of change, someone who stood by his side when others walked away. Now that same person might be working against him. Traore closed the file and looked out the window. The sun was setting over the city, casting a soft orange light over the rooftops. He knew this was just the beginning. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid, but he was ready. "Keep watching," he said. "No sudden moves. Not yet." As the night rolled in, the compound remained silent, but inside those walls, a quiet storm was growing, and Ibrahim Traore was standing right at the center of it, calm as ever, waiting for the truth to show its face. The days passed quietly, but inside the palace, nothing felt normal. The guards were more alert. The meetings were shorter. Ibrahim Traore moved with calm, but his eyes noticed everything. His team had started watching closely. They were not looking for enemies outside. They were looking within. Something wasn't right, and the signs were everywhere. One night, just after sunset, a young guard came to report something strange. He had seen two men speaking in hushed tones near the back gate, far from where they were supposed to be. When he walked toward them, they quickly stepped apart and acted like nothing happened. One of them was on the list of trusted advisors. The other was not even scheduled to be on duty. Traore took the report without showing much emotion. "Note the time and keep watching," he said simply. More reports started coming in. Short meetings in dark corners, unmarked cars near the compound at strange hours, and messages that didn't match up with the official plans. The same name kept showing up again and again: Captain B. Captain B had been part of the leadership circle since the early days of change. He wasn't loud or flashy. He did his job quietly. He was seen in photos standing just a few feet behind Traore. He gave advice, passed on orders, and helped organize high-level security tasks. People trusted him. Maybe that's why no one looked too closely at first. But now, the pattern was becoming clear. Captain always seemed to be near when something unusual happened. He often volunteered for duties that gave him access to secure areas. He asked questions that didn't seem important at first, but now felt too detailed. One evening, during a closed-door meeting, Traore asked his team, "How far do you think this goes?" No one answered right away. Finally, one officer said, "We don't know yet, but it's deeper than we thought." They decided to start tracing digital signals, phones, radios, messages, anything that might show who was talking to who. They kept it quiet. No arrests, no warnings, just careful steps. Captain B continued his duties like nothing was wrong. He smiled, he nodded, he followed orders. But behind the scenes, the circle around him was tightening. Every move he made was being recorded, every message checked. The net was slowly closing in. Traoré didn't rush. He had learned long ago that power was not just about strength, it was about patience. If he acted too early, the others involved might run. If he waited too long, they might strike first. So he waited, but not without action. That night, while most of the city slept, a quiet group of trusted officers met in a locked room. Maps were laid out, names were marked, and in the center of it all was one name written in red ink: Captain B. They were getting close, and they knew it. Captain B had always been quiet. He was the kind of man who didn't speak much in meetings, but when he did, people listened. He had a calm voice, steady hands, and a sharp memory. Many in the palace respected him. Some even looked up to him. They thought he was loyal to Captain Ibrahim Traore, a man they had all followed during difficult times. But Captain B had another side, one that no one saw, not until recently. He moved through the palace with confidence. He greeted soldiers by name. He remembered their families and birthdays. He never showed anger, and he always seemed in control. To most people, he was just a smart and helpful officer. But Ibrahim Traore was now looking at him differently. The information collected over the past week painted a different picture. Captain had been meeting people outside of his duties. He had been using a second phone, hidden under a loose board in his room. And that phone had connected with numbers that belonged to known supporters of the previous regime. There was no open proof yet, nothing that could be used in court, but the pieces were falling into place. One of the guards recalled a small moment that now felt strange. A few weeks ago, Captain B had asked about the patrol schedule for the back gate. At the time, it didn't seem important. He said he was checking security, but now it looked more like he was planning something. Another officer remembered how Captain B had spoken against some of Traore's ideas in private conversations. He didn't speak up during meetings, but later, in quiet corners, he would complain. Too fast, he would say. This change is not stable. Traoré sat with these thoughts, not with anger, but with focus. He knew people were allowed to have opinions, but Captain B had gone beyond that. He wasn't just speaking, he was acting. And yet, Captain B still showed up each day, standing in meetings, giving advice, checking reports. It was like watching a snake move through dry grass, silent, hidden, and dangerous. He's careful, said one of the security chiefs. He knows he's being watched, but he doesn't know how much we know. Traoré nodded. We wait. We don't just need to catch him. We need to know who else is with him. The team continued their work. They followed calls. They marked meetings. They listened, but never made a move. And Captain B? He kept smiling. He moved through the palace with ease, unaware that every step he took was being tracked. In the eyes of most, he was still the loyal officer. But for Ibrahim Traore, he had become the man behind the smile, the man who might soon show his true face. The investigation was no longer just about one man. The more the team searched, the more they found. Captain wasn't acting alone. He was part of something larger, something carefully planned and well hidden. Inside a small room deep in the palace, Ibrahim Traore and his closest officers met every evening. The room had no windows, just a table, a map, and a board filled with names and numbers. Red strings connected locations. Papers were stacked neatly, each one filled with notes, signals, and times. One signal caught their attention. It came from a house in the city, not far from the military zone. Someone there had received a short, encrypted message at the same time Captain left the palace one night. The message had no names, just codes, but the pattern matched other messages sent before past unrest in the region. Traore's intelligence officers began tracking every message. They used quiet tools, devices that didn't leave a trace. With each day, they discovered more messages. Some came from nearby towns. Others came from across the border. All of them connected in some way to Captain B's hidden phone. The phone itself had been found during a quiet room check. It wasn't left in plain sight. It was hidden under a floorboard, wrapped in cloth to keep it from making sound. When the team examined it, they found deleted messages, contact lists with false names, and numbers tied to old government officers no longer in power. Traoré read the report carefully. He's been planning this for a while, he said, and he's not doing it alone. The phone logs showed that Captain B would sometimes leave the palace for short trips, claiming personal reasons. But those trips matched the times when messages were sent or received from certain locations. He would go alone, never taking guards. Now those trips were seen as secret meetings. But the real break came when they traced one number to a former officer known for his role in past political trouble. That man had gone quiet after Traoré's rise to power. No one knew where he was. But now it seemed he was back and connected to this plot. They want to shake the system again, said one officer. Same plan, different faces. Traoré nodded. He understood the risk. It wasn't just about one officer causing trouble. It was about a group waiting for the right moment to act. But they wouldn't get that chance. The team began preparing quietly. They mapped Captain B's movements. They followed the contacts, and they waited. Outside the palace, the streets were calm. The people knew nothing of what was happening behind the walls. Life moved forward, markets stayed open, and the sun continued to rise. But inside the palace, something big was unfolding, and Ibrahim Traore was watching it all, step by step, with one goal: to protect the future before it was stolen again. Ibrahim Traore knew that time was important now. He couldn't wait too long, but he also couldn't act too fast. If he moved before the truth was fully revealed, others involved in the plan might escape. Everything had to be done quietly and smartly. So he set a trap. His team came up with a plan. They created a fake message, using a style that looked just like the hidden ones Captain B had been receiving. The message was sent through a private channel that only a few people knew about. It spoke of a secret meeting. It said something big was coming. It was the kind of message that would get the attention of anyone involved in a plot. They didn't send it to Captain B directly. Instead, they passed it through someone they believed was connected to him. A quiet worker who often left the palace without anyone asking questions. The bait was set. Within hours, the message reached its target. They watched as Captain became more active. He walked faster, made more calls, and spoke to certain people in hushed tones. He thought no one was watching, but every move was being recorded. Every message was being tracked. He took the bait. 3 days later, he left the palace late in the evening. He told the guards he had family matters to handle. It wasn't strange. He had done it before, but this time, a team followed him. He drove toward the edge of the city, then switched cars. A second car, already waiting for him, picked him up and continued the journey. The team didn't lose sight. They stayed far back, changing cars themselves, making sure Captain B never knew he was being watched. Finally, he arrived at a small, quiet house near the hills. The lights were low. 2 men were already waiting for him. The team waited in silence, hidden in the darkness. They didn't move. They just listened. What they heard confirmed everything. Captain B spoke of movements, of taking control, of messages that needed to be sent out. He didn't know the fake message was part of the trap. He believed the time to act had come. Ibrahim Traore got the full report before sunrise. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. Instead, he gave one order: bring him in, without noise. The team moved fast. They waited for Captain B to leave the house, then stopped him on a quiet road outside the city. No gunfire, no shouting, just a smooth arrest. He didn't fight. He looked surprised, like he didn't understand what had gone wrong. By the time the sun rose, Captain was back inside the palace. But this time, he wasn't walking the halls as an officer. He was sitting in a locked room, facing the truth he thought would never catch him. The trap had worked, and the storm that had been growing in silence had now begun to break. The room where Captain B was held had no windows. Just a table, a chair, and 2 guards at the door. The lights stayed on, not too bright, not too dim. Everything inside was calm, but heavy with tension. Captain sat quietly. He didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He just looked ahead, as if trying to understand how everything had gone wrong. He was not used to being the one on the other side of the table. Ibrahim Traore didn't come right away. He gave Captain B time to think. He knew that silence sometimes worked better than pressure. The weight of waiting could break even the strongest men. After some hours, an officer entered the room and placed a file on the table. It was thick, full of papers, photos, and records. Captain B glanced at it but said nothing. "We know," the officer said. "We have the messages, the meetings, the phone. We followed everything." Captain B finally looked up. His eyes were tired, but he stayed quiet. "This was more than just a plan," the officer continued. "It was a threat to everything we've built, and you were not alone." Outside the room, Traoré was standing with his team. They watched from a small screen, listening to every word. He had chosen not to enter the room yet. This was not about anger. It was about control. "He's still holding back," one officer said. "He's not afraid yet." Traoré nodded. "He won't break for fear. He'll break when he realizes it's already over." They had already started arresting others. The two men from the house near the hills were in custody. Their phones gave even more names. Some were inside the military, others were outside in civilian clothing. It was a network, hidden in silence, waiting to strike. Traoré's team moved quickly but quietly. They didn't want panic. They didn't want to shake the city. They wanted truth, clear and complete. Back in the room, the officer placed photos on the table. Each one showed a different face. People who had already been caught. "They've all spoken," he said. "You are the last piece." Captain B looked at the faces. For the first time, his expression changed. Not fear, but surprise. Maybe even disappointment. He had trusted those men. Now they were all caught, and they had talked. Still, he said nothing. The officer stood up. "You can stay silent if you want, but this is no longer a question of if. It's only a matter of how." He left the room. The door closed again. Outside, Traoré watched the screen for a moment longer, then turned away. His mission wasn't finished. There were still names missing, still paths to uncover. But the heart of the plan had been caught, and that changed everything. The silence in the palace was different now. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of truth, slowly rising to the surface. The arrest of Captain B sent quiet waves through the palace. No announcements were made, no statements to the public. But people noticed. They noticed the way some officers avoided certain hallways. They noticed how the guards stood tighter around Captain Traoré. They noticed that a few familiar faces were suddenly missing from meetings. Ibrahim Traoré remained calm. He continued his daily work, held his regular meetings, and gave no sign that anything unusual had happened. But behind the calm surface, his team was working faster than ever. Captain B had still not spoken, but he didn't have to. The data they recovered from his devices was enough to keep the investigation moving. His contacts were being found one by one. Names were matched with phone numbers, photos, and movements. One of the names stood out. Major M. He was not as well known as Captain B, but he had been part of the system for a long time. He worked in logistics, moving supplies, vehicles, and sometimes information. People thought he was harmless, just another officer doing his job. But his name kept showing up in the background. He had been at nearly every location where secret meetings happened. He had sent supplies to remote areas without clear reasons. And worse, he had used his position to move messages quietly through military channels. Traoré looked at the evidence carefully. He hid in plain sight, he said. While we watched the front, he moved in the shadows. An order was given. Find Major M, bring him in. But when the team went to his home, he was gone. His room was empty, and his phone was left behind, switched off and wiped clean. It was clear he had been warned. "We have a leak," said one officer. "Someone told him we were coming." Traoré didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "Tighten the circle. No more information leaves this room unless it comes through me." The search for Major M began immediately. Roads were checked, airports watched, and every border post was given a silent alert. He couldn't be allowed to escape. Meanwhile, back in the holding room, Captain B remained silent, but his face had changed. He seemed to understand now that the plan had failed. The network was falling apart. Outside, the air in the palace felt heavier. Trust was shaken. Even old friends were now being watched, but Traoré knew it was a necessary step. "We can't build a new future if we carry the same hidden dangers from the past," he told his team. The capture of Captain B had opened the door. Now Traoré had to walk through it, knowing that the path ahead would not be easy. But the mission was clear: clean the system, protect the people, and stop the storm before it returned again. The city woke up like any other morning. Shops opened, children walked to school, and people filled the streets. No one could see the storm that had nearly broken the heart of the palace. Everything had happened in silence. That silence had been the shield. It had also been the sword. Inside the palace, the search for Majorem continued. Teams moved quietly through checkpoints, scanning names and watching roads. But still, no sign. He had disappeared without a trace. Some believed he had crossed the border. Others thought he was hiding nearby, waiting for things to calm down. Ibrahim Traore did not stop. Even with Captain in custody and the plot exposed, he knew the danger wasn't over. This kind of plan never came from one man. It was always a group, and there were always more hidden hands. His team began cleaning the ranks. Every officer was reviewed. Messages were traced. Permissions were cut. The palace became tighter, more guarded, more focused. In the middle of all this, Traore made a quiet visit to the intelligence room. He looked at the map again, lines, photos, names, and arrows pointing to every corner of the country. This map had once been a guess. Now it told the full story. "We stopped something big," said one officer. Traore nodded, but not the last. He walked through the halls of the palace, calm but watchful. The people around him had changed. Some were new. Some had earned his full trust. But all of them understood one thing clearly now. Even inside strong walls, danger can grow in silence. Outside, people still talked about peace and progress. They spoke of the future with hope. Few would ever know how close it had come to being stolen. Captain remained under investigation. Each day, more of his connections were uncovered. His silence had become less important now. The truth was already out. And Majorem? He became a symbol, a reminder that not every battle ends with a capture. Some enemies disappear. But even that, Traore believed, was part of the lesson. As the sun set over the city, the palace stood quiet but firm. The flag still waved above the walls. The guards stood taller. And inside, a new level of alertness had taken hold. Ibrahim Traore gathered his closest team one last time. "We didn't just stop a coup," he said. "We stopped a shadow from growing too strong. But shadows always come back when light fades. Our job now is to keep that light strong." They nodded. This was not a victory speech. It was a reminder. Because in the end, the fight for peace is not won in one moment. It is won each day, in every small decision, in every quiet watch. And with that, the chapter closed, but the mission continued.